A lot of the people who show up every week for the Friday Desert Pencil webinar are in the real estate industry. And that makes sense because I've been in the industry for over 35 years, and I have trained tens of thousands of people in the industry all over the country. So what I wanted to today in the Desert Pencil webinar was to talk about the market, but not just a market update, to talk about what's really affecting and influencing the market, which right now is kind of flat, and that is Fed monetary policy. This is something I've talked a lot about to my audiences and also at the webinar, but I want to do a little bit differently this week, so I brought in an outside expert. And I brought in the guy who runs the channel called Clear Value Tax on YouTube, and he is excellent. You should check it out, support him. So we did this week in the webinar is we watched one of his videos and then we talked about it. It was a great discussion, lots of excellent content. The audience participated, and that's what you're going to get in today's Desert Pencil webinar. Hope you enjoy it. Disclaimers before we get into this. So first of all, this guy, Clear Value Tax, I have no idea who he is, but I really, really like him. And I like him because he knows what he's talking about, and he's not partisan, thank God. And all his videos are, 8 or 10 minutes, and it's good stuff. And I wish I, would have started doing what he started doing, because he has a couple more people following him than I do. But I do other stuff too. But he's really good. And the thing I like about him is he doesn't just tell you what, he tells you why. And that's a huge thing for me as an instructor and a speaker and a course developer. So I watch a lot of his stuff. I support his channel. He just put out a book. I'm going to buy it. You guys can do what you want. But at least subscribe to his channel. If we're going to watch his stuff, at least give him a little love, okay? So I made a handout, as you see, and there's 10 points in it. And it just kind of summarizes some of the stuff. So what I want to do is, and we'll just play this in just a minute here. We'll play the first 4 minutes, then we'll stop. Then I want to just talk about what he talked about. So if you want to make some extra notes, I always say bring pen and paper to this thing. Make your notes or look at the sheet that I gave you, the PDF. Either way, we'll have a little bit of discussion, and then we'll watch the second half, okay? So I'm going to queue up on my end. And if you want to get it ready on your end, you can do that. And I'm going to start it in 3, 2, 1 now.
In today's video, I want to give you a housing market update. We're going to cover home prices, mortgage interest rates, the Federal Reserve's monetary policy, what the consequences of that is, and also whether it's a buyer's market or a seller's market, and also predictions. So let's start off with this. When looking at home prices at a national level, you have to realize that home prices are not crashing. As a matter of fact, home prices are up 1.5% compared to last year. I just want to address the people that are going to say that you can't look at it at a national level. So I'll just say, don't worry, we're going to break this down into regions as well. But you have to understand that if home prices are down 5% in one area, then in another area, home prices are up by 6.5%. So I just want to point out the fact that home affordability is at record lows. Now, I want you to take a look at this. So housing market activity is at historic lows. In August of 2025, 460,000 homes were sold. So that's 2.5% fewer than 12 months ago. But that's 31% lower compared to 5 years ago. In August of 2020, 672,000 homes were sold. So now we're at 460,000, a big difference. So this begs the question, why is this happening? Why is the housing market so sluggish? So first, as I showed you, home prices are still very expensive. And the second thing is that mortgage interest rates are still elevated, relatively speaking, compared to when we were in the 3% or sub 3% range. So this shows the average mortgage interest rate on our 30-year fixed, and this is presented by the Federal Reserve. Right now, we're still above 6%. Therefore, it's the higher home prices and higher mortgage interest rates that have caused home affordability to fall, resulting in such a slow housing market. Now, the big question is, will mortgage interest rates drop from here, maintain in this range, or actually even go up from here? Here's what you need to know to clear up the confusion. The Federal Reserve cut the Fed funds interest rate on September 17th from 4.5% to 4.25%. So it was a tiny cut. They only cut it by 0.25%, a quarter point. But just so you know, the Federal Reserve gives projections, and they're saying that they want to cut interest rates gradually over the next 3 years. So let me show you. This is straight from the Federal Reserve's newest projection. Right now, as I said, the Fed funds interest rate's at 4.25%. They are projecting that they're going to cut the interest rate down to 3.0% to 3.25% by the end of 2028. Now, to give you some context, when mortgage interest rates were 3% or sub 3%, the Fed funds interest rate was at 0% to 0.25%. Therefore, according to the Federal Reserve's projections, it's going to be a slow interest rate cutting cycle. Now, I want to give you my opinion. Mortgage interest rates are correlated to the interest rate on 10-year government treasury notes. So basically what I'm saying is that mortgage interest rates depends on the interest rates on government debts, on especially the 10-year. So if the interest rate on the 10-year goes down, then mortgage interest rates are going to go down. If they go up, then you can expect mortgage interest rates to go up. Okay, here's the thing. This is so important to know. I want you to know that the Federal Reserve cut interest rates in 2024, and the interest rates on the 10-year yield, I mean, take a look at the chart. It didn't do anything. The 10-year yield remained range-bound, and as a matter of fact, the interest rate on the 10-year yield went up. So the Federal Reserve cut interest rates, the 10-year yield, it ticked higher, resulting in mortgage interest rates going higher. So just because the Federal Reserve is cutting interest rates does not mean that mortgage interest rates will drop significantly. Now, this is where I give you my opinion. So there's that saying, most people have probably heard of it, that the Federal...
All right, let's talk about the first part of what they said. Mr. Cullen, what say you? Agree, disagree, good, bad? What do you think?
I think it's all pretty spot on. It kind of correlates with what Brian Buffini was talking about. Let me see if I can get back down to my other screen here. Sorry. I think there is the mortgage interest rates are not directly related to the Feds. We are definitely down with overall home sales. And the other thing he didn't speak to is we expect maybe 250,000 agents to leave the National Association of Realtors this year. A lot of people in our profession are really struggling right now.
It's part of the cycle.
Yeah.
You know, I've been licensed for 35 years, and I've always said this is an easy in, easy out industry.
Well, it's so interesting. I talked to a good friend of mine who's a really good agent here in Santa Cruz. She closed 7 transactions last month. Okay. And then other people are going to work at Trader Joe's. So it's an interesting time to be in the business.
Okay, let me just kind of put something on top of that. That's a good point, Pete, because now we're in, okay, so if we go back to the COVID time, like you said, 2021, 4 years ago, it's inverted. It's totally flipped, okay? If you could get a listing in 2021, you're going to get a paycheck. There's just no question about it, and everybody knows it, okay? You didn't have to be a good salesperson. Didn't have to do much. It was pretty easy money, and we all know it. And thanks to, I'm going to say it again, the criminals at the Fed, everybody got about a 20% a year pay hike. Well, it's 4 years later, and now it's flipped. And now, this is my argument, which you don't have to believe if you don't want to, but I've just seen this too many times. A great salesperson can sell anything in any environment. And now you're seeing the great salespeople survive. And they tend to be the people that do the things that not great salespeople don't do. Okay, I mean, I've been through this. This is probably the 4th cycle I've been through in 35 years. So those of you who've been around, you know, this is what happens. So, okay. Sage, what do you think about our first 4 minutes of that video? What do you have to add to that?
I love that guy.
Have you seen him before?
Nope, I haven't, but he's right on. I think, yes, we have all of those factors, but the other factor is that I think we're short like about 5 million units for all the up and coming people who need to have a place to live.
Right.
So over time, it's going to average out. So like you said, the ones who can stick through another cycle and be excited about it, they'll do fine.
Okay, one more. Debbie Kearns. How are you? Good to see you again. Thanks for showing up.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Fridays can be hard for me. So yeah, it's great to be here. Yeah, I really like the guy. He talks very, very fast. So that was a little challenging for me, but I agree with what he said, that on point to what Sage just said was the fact that we don't have enough units. And then in Seattle, I'm in Seattle, we're allowing all these multiple units being built, the ADUs and DADUs, to bring in affordable housing that are not affordable. So if they're trying to see more affordable housing to help with all of the what we need in the market, that's not happening. So it's going to be interesting to watch to see what cities do these next few years to actually help with that.
Reserve does not control mortgage interest rates, but in my belief, that is not true, or at least not properly stated. I think that the proper thing to say is that the Federal Reserve cutting interest rates will not lower mortgage interest rates. However, cutting interest rates is not the only tool of the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve, they can do quantitative easing, they can expand their balance sheet, they can flood the financial system with money. And yes, they can easily bring down mortgage interest rates if they wanted to. So it's my suspicion that the economy will degrade next year and the Federal Reserve will be forced to react with their monetary policy. And it's going to cause much lower interest rates in 2026. QE balance sheet expansion on top of much more aggressive rate cuts with Trump's new Federal Reserve chair. So that's just my prediction. Will rates go down as low as 3%? I mean, it just depends on how aggressive their monetary policy is going to become. Now, I just want you to think about that. If the Federal Reserve aggressively eases their monetary policy, then what's going to happen to home prices? What will be the consequences? My prediction is that home prices are going to either remain flat or they're going to go up higher. So in other words, I'm expecting that we're not going to have a housing market crash. If the economy degrades, then naturally home prices would go down. They should go down. However, if the Federal Reserve comes to the rescue, then that's going to either prevent a crash or it'll cause a V-shaped recovery. And if the Federal Reserve overdoes their rescue, then home prices will go up. I mean, they're going to go up even higher. And it's going to be no different than the GFC or the pandemic. But listen, I want to tell you this. If we lived in a free market, then home prices would be going down right now, probably substantially at a national level. It wouldn't just be home prices. The stock market would be going down. Everything would be going down. We would have deflation. But our country would collapse in the event of any major deflation. So I just wanted to share my perspective with you based on what's happening with monetary policy and the economy. But I want to show you what the mainstream experts are saying. In 2026, the National Association of Realtors predicts that home prices are going to go up by 4%. Fannie Mae predicts that home prices will go up by 1.1%. Mortgage Bankers Association predicts that home prices will go up by 0.3% in 2026, so close to flat. Therefore, the range is from flat to up to 4%. I would say that personally, I like that range as a prediction. Maybe a little bit higher on the top end if monetary policy gets very loose. Now, going back to our current situation, I want to show you this. At a national level, home prices are up, as I said, by 1.5% year over year. However, this really shows you that it depends on where you live. Here's the 1-year change in home prices in the US. So it's really the South that's seen the biggest price drops. Moderate decline in certain parts of California, although some parts of California have actually gone up. But home prices continue to go higher in most parts of the North and the Northeast. And I wanted to show you this as well. So this goes back 12 years. This shows you whether we're in a buyer's market or a seller's market. Again, it depends on your market, but this is just overall. The red line represents how many buyers are actively looking. The blue line represents active sellers. As you can see over the years, there are fewer buyers and fewer sellers, which has resulted in a depressed housing market. That's why the activity is much slower. In 2020 through 2022, there were so many more buyers than there were sellers. So what happens in that type of situation? Well, if you have so much more demand than supply, then it becomes a seller's market And home prices shot up, much higher because of the massive supply and demand imbalance. But right now, it's really shifted into a buyer's market. However, if you notice the gap between the buyers and sellers, our current buyer's market, it's not as pronounced as it was a seller's market back in 2021 or 2022. But this is why home prices have stopped shooting up. But right now, according to the MLS data, it's a buyer's market. There are 35% more sellers than there are buyers. So this is driving downward pressure on home prices. However, you have to remember that we still have inflation. The M2 money supply is at record highs, which is naturally causing upward pressure on home prices. Okay, so that's the current status of the housing market. Fewer buyers and fewer sellers, but it's become a buyer's market. But now that the Federal Reserve is becoming more active, we're going to see how their monetary policy affects the housing market, which I'll keep you updated on. So please subscribe. Thank you for the support, and I wish you a very nice day. Take care.
Chris Kellen, what'd you think about the second half of that?
Well, just a couple comments. I think it's interesting, when the Fed's going to make a rate cut or there's anticipation of the Fed making a rate cut, you see that start to be priced in like 30 days ahead, and then the Fed makes the cut and rates start to climb again. So, it's clear that the cut isn't really directly tied. As far as the second half of the video, with respect to supply and demand, yeah, I mean, I think he, makes a solid case for, why we're seeing what we're seeing. I wouldn't argue with anything there. And frankly, I think it's probably going to continue to, can't remember who said it. I think Sage, is it Sage? Sage's point. We don't, at least on the national scale, and probably to some degree here in our Pacific Northwest area as well, we don't have as much supply as there is going to be demand, even though right now that doesn't look like the case. I mean, there's many more listings than there are buyers at the moment. But on the whole, you're going to see home prices continue to climb almost regardless of, what the rest of the market's doing. Whether because that's cost of building or, what quantitative easing or what have you. So I expect prices to continue to climb. I think they're going to be pretty modest. I'm looking myself at probably a point to a point and a half, I think is reasonable to expect here. But part of that's because we climbed so high, through the pandemic and stuff, that we're sort of already at these lofty points. And there are certainly, micro neighborhoods or sub areas, if you will, that you are seeing some pullback, right? I mean, it's not, they're losing home value, but they escalated so high in COVID, it was, super frothy, I guess I would say. Some of those bubbles in the froth are popping.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Okay, I'm having a problem to focus on my camera. Sorry. Sometimes that happens.
Hey, Joe, can I just chime in
Yeah,
with
go ahead.
our market here in Santa Cruz? I mean, for the past 10 plus years, we've hovered around 125 active single family res on the market on any given day. We're now at 550. So, I mean, that just speaks to the inventory situation and what you were talking about. One of the words I'm using right now to describe the market is pockety. It seems like there's pockets of hyperactivity and pockets of languishing activity. And we're seeing some areas with multiple offers, other areas where stuff is just sitting for months. So it's kind of all over the place. It's really hard to get your finger on the pulse right now and figure out, any kind of holistic analysis, right, of the market.
Hey, Pete, I grew up in Aptos. How's Aptos doing?
Aptos is great. Our office is at the Redwood Village,
Oh, cool.
where it used to be the little Piggy's Market, and
Yeah, that's
so
right
I've been
behind
with
Old Junior High School.
you. Went awesome. Well, I work at Bailey Properties. I've been there for over 15 years. Robert and Paul are my brokers. They've been in the business 50 years. So It's
Not
great.
to hijack Joe's thing here.
Oh no,
but
I think
my
you
first
guys ought to
sales
go to the
job
high
was
school reunion next year together.
my first sales job was buying candy at Piggy's with my allowance and then reselling it at school for double or triple what I paid for it at Piggy's.
Dude, that is so funny because I went to Catholic school down in West LA and I would buy Cokes during the heat spells and then sell ice cold Cokes to the kids in the playground until the nuns shut me down.
Yeah,
Anyways,
that's
I'm
too
from
funny.
Tacoma, and I'd buy a bag of pot this big and then cut it into little bags. So never mind.
Hey,
We're
we
all
were doing that too,
entrepreneurs, right?
Joe.
Okay.
Joe,
Yeah.
so this kind of goes back to marry the house, date the rate. For buyers right now, it's in Tri-Cities especially, it's that sweet spot where prices have come down on a lot of the higher end homes, not so much the lower end homes, but we are seeing homes now under 300,000, which I haven't seen for years. But if they can struggle through the higher interest rate, for a year, then they're getting that much more house. And then as soon as the rate drops, you get a free refinance or you get a refinance, and that will obviously drop their payment every month. So we're looking at houses now and coming in with low aggressive offers, and buyers are getting it because sellers don't want to be on the market anymore, because they're not gone in 20 days anymore. And so they are getting a good deal on these homes, and with the anticipation that rates will drop.
One of the reasons that I want to do this talk is that I wanted to give you guys a couple of arguments. And what I mean by arguments is when you're talking to buyers who are just like, the time isn't right yet, or you're talking to sellers who are saying the time isn't right yet. Okay? Because one of the subtitles of that video was, why is the market so sluggish? And I've talked about this before. And you guys have seen this too. There are a lot of buyers and sellers out there that's like, I'm just not doing anything yet, right? I mean, this is why we're in the situation that we're in. Okay? And I'm not saying tell people do things that aren't good for them. I'm not saying that. But right now, if I was trying to help a seller decide what they were going to do, and I'm gonna pick it's like Pete said, okay, pockets. Here's the pocket I'm going to speak to right now. I'm going to speak to the retiree, the downsizer, that person. That's who I'm talking to. What I would say is the statistics are in. You're not getting 20% of your appreciation anymore. It's not happening. It's probably not going to happen. And if that person in that pocket, in my example, is a retiree, what they really need to be thinking about is taking their equity and turning it into income. That's really what they need to do. Okay? And right now in the liquid markets, bonds, stocks, that, private equity, that kind of thing, you can get way more than 1.5% for doing nothing. Okay? So that's an argument for a seller to sell. Here's an argument for a buyer to buy. And I'm basically going to repeat what Christine just said. Right now, and I'm looking again, if I listen to what that guy said, and I think he's pretty right on, if I look at an 18 to 24 month window, which I think is a reasonable expectation at a reasonable minimum to own a reasonable home, I think you're going to see mortgage rates drop about 100 basis points. That's 1%. That is the optimal environment to refi, and simultaneously it'll be, he talks about a V-shaped recovery. You're going to see another round of appreciation when rates go down. And that will be exacerbated by what Debbie said, and it's true in a lot of markets, is there's an undersupply. Now there's going to be, it's the pocket thing. It's like Pete said, well, in Santa Cruz, we have 4 times more houses than we used to have. Okay. But you've also got certain places where you're still enjoying multiple overpriced offers. Okay. So this is is where you guys are the value add. Because you know stuff that all the ding-dongs on the YouTube don't. This is your moment to add value in my view. And I think, I'm getting ready to buy right now for the very reason I just said. I think this is an optimal time for buyers. I do. And I'm not just, blowing sunshine at people. I really do. I think that we sit here for 2 years from now, Lord willing, I'm still able to, and we look back on this call. Sorry, I'm out of focus, but there's something wrong with my camera right now. We're going to say, he was right. Rates are down. Equities are up. This is what happens. I have a very good friend in the mortgage business, and it's Karen. She's been on this call before. She's been doing this for like almost 40 years. And she is very well-versed, well-read, up-to-date, current. She's an excellent mortgage broker. And she's told me time and time again, once we get below 6, that's when the market unlocks. She says, that's the magic barrier. She goes, I don't know why, but it is. So I think that's coming. Now, I'll just mention a couple other quick things and open it back up to you guys. I was telling somebody this at the gym this morning. I don't know why, but it just came up maybe because I was getting ready to talk to you guys today. So I think that all of what this fella said and what I believe is also integral to this conversation are a couple things that he kind of lightly touched on, but I think they warrant an honorable mention. So one of them is next spring, we're going to have a new Fed chairman. It's coming. Okay. Jay Powell will be out, and he will probably very publicly out. And that will have a level of influence over Fed policy. And if the current president has his way, he'll stand on the guy's head to get him to lower rates. All right. So I would imagine that will be another force to get rates to come down. Okay. So that's one thing to pay attention to. Another thing to pay attention to, however, and this is a counteracting force, is inflation. Okay. It's not gone, in case you haven't been to the grocery store lately. It's not gone at all. And it's a thing, and it matters. And, we lived for probably like 20 years in a 3% year over year inflationary environment, 2 to 3, that's where the Fed wants to keep it. But another part of the problem, I'm not being political, I'm just being factual. If you saw that news report a couple weeks ago, the president fired that person with the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. That is a key government agency, which I guess now is some drama of meltdown, shutdown, whatever for this week's drama. But those are the people that collect the data that the Fed uses to make policy.